Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Hyatt. I'm city manager here for City of Woodland, and welcome to hopefully the right Zoom webinar that you logged on to. We're here with Kim McKinney, our Administrative Services Director, and wanted to provide residents in Spring Lake with an opportunity to hear a short presentation and also get an update on the Spring Lake CFD bonds, which are a subject of much interest and conversation in Spring Lake. And I would say also a fair amount of confusion. We felt it would be beneficial to offer an opportunity to interact directly and share in a more communal context some responses to some of the questions that are floating around relative to Spring Lake Community Services Financing District. The council at its June 1st meeting did approve issuance of the next round of Spring Lake infrastructure bonds, which were anticipated as part of the build out of Spring Lake infrastructure. And with the June 15th deadline regarding prepayment, there's a lot of questions around what are the implications of homeowner prepaying now versus after the bonds are issued and whatnot. So I'll stop there and I'll ask Kim to walk through a short presentation. What we'll do is after presentation, we'll give folks an opportunity, of course, to ask questions we can respond to. And I will sort of play traffic control. So if you have a question, please raise your hands and then I will call your name and we'll allow you to speak on our end through our control that we have here. So if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you individually. Also, the meeting is being recorded. So we will offer a link to the video for folks that aren't able to attend that have questions as well. So with that, Kim, you want to go ahead and walk folks through the CFD history and a little bit about where we're at right now?
Sure. So Spring Lake was formed in 2001, and part of the plan for paying for the infrastructure that was needed to allow housing to develop, including roads, sewer, water, was planned to be paid for in part by issuance of bonds through a community facilities district, or CFD, which you'll hear me say a bunch of times, which also means Mello-Roos. That's a common term used for that as well. So the first time that we issued bonds, Mello-Roos bonds, was in 2004, and that money was used to begin building infrastructure. Back in 2001 and through 2004, there was the Community Facilities District was formed in Spring Lake, and there was a maximum amount of debt that was authorized to be issued, which is about $112 million. And that was based on, there was an overall plan of everything that needed to be installed to allow for Spring Lake to build. And that list of capital projects was in the neighborhood at the time of almost $200 million. So the $112 million that I just mentioned, which was the maximum allowable amount of debt that we could issue, would not pay for everything, but would allow for some majority of funding to come from bond issuance. So in 2004, we issued the first bonds. We refunded those bonds in 2013 and got a better interest rate so that they cost less. And then we have continued to issue debt a couple of times since then. We did in 2016 and again in 2019. And we are planning to issue another series of bonds in the next couple of months. And every time we issue bonds, the money that we get from those is used to continue to build infrastructure in Spring Lake. It cannot be used anywhere else in the city. It cannot be used for regular maintenance. We can't use it to build something downtown. That's very restricted in how we can use it, and it has to be part of the qualifying list of projects that were developed when the bonds were approved. Also, when the bonds were approved, there was direction provided and some legal specifics about how those bonds would be paid back. And those are paid back through assessments on property owner property tax bills every year. And you'll see those on your property tax bills. Community Facilities District 2004-1, I think is what you see on your property tax bills. And the money that we collect through that is used to pay the annual debt service on the bonds that are outstanding. So when a building permit is pulled out there, and when you bought your house, you're paying what we call the maximum allowable assessment, which was calculated again back in 2004. And that maximum allowable assessment, this will increase by 2% a year per all the legal documents. And we can never assess any more than that to anybody out in Spring Lake without a vote of the property owners, which we're not asking to do and we don't anticipate doing. So the most that maximum can go up is 2% a year. And it also specified that assessment can only go through, and I know this sounds like a long time, it is a long time, through 2050. After the year 2050, there will be no more assessments for Mello-Roos for the 2004-1 CFD in Spring Lake. Any and all bonds that we have issued would have been paid off by then, and we can't collect the special tax or the CFD anymore. What we do is we didn't want to issue all the debt day one because we didn't need to have money just sitting around when we're not ready to be building projects. And there's a couple of restrictions legally on us doing that as well. We're supposed to spend any and all bond proceeds that we get within 3 years of getting the money. So we didn't want to issue a bunch of bonds day one when we may not have needed them, and then, potentially sit on the money and not use it for projects and increase the assessment to property owners. So we've been phasing the bonds over time, like I mentioned before. We believe, or we hope, this might be the last series of bonds that we're issuing. We would have the ability under the maximum assessment to issue up to $9 million more in debt if we need it. But based on the information that we have now, the projects that are either under construction or are about to start, we think we will cover it with the bonds that we're anticipating issuing this summer. I think there's been some confusion about what issuing more debt means for the property owners in Spring Lake. And as I mentioned before, we already have a maximum allowable assessment, and that's each year what you've been seeing on your property tax bill can go up, like I mentioned before, 2% a year. Issuing more debt right now, the bonds that we're talking about issuing will not change that. The assessment that you're going to have next year on your property would be the same as it would be if we were not issuing more debt. So there's been some confusion, I think, about what that means for you. There is an option, you do have an option to prepay your Mello-Roos when you're a participant in the district. So what that means is if you want to pay a lump sum amount, a one-time voluntary payment, that means that you would pay this money. It pays off your obligation related to the Mello-Roos. What we do is we get the money from any prepayments and we buy back some of the debt that's outstanding, so then we don't need as much money on an annual basis to make those payments. So that's how the prepayments work. And we can do that 2 times a year. And so there are specific timelines that we have when we need to collect money for prepayments. So if you want to prepay the Mello-Roos in Spring Lake, you can request a quote, and the quote will tell you what your one-time contribution amount would be. You can make the payment, and then your property, whether you own it or not, your property will no longer be included in the Mello-Roos. So that amount will go up when we issue additional debt. And so the dates, I mentioned 2 times a year we can buy back debt. That date that we can buy back debt is coming up. And so there is a time limit on when we can continue to collect these prepayments before we update the calculation. So June 15th is the last day that we can get prepayment contributions submitted to the city, whether you come and drop it off at City Hall in person or if it's postmarked by the 15th. That's the last day that we can accept those prepayments to allow us time to buy back some of the bonds that are outstanding. If you want to prepay after that, you certainly can. You would just have to request a new quote. So if you have a quote that you've already received and you aren't sure if you want a prepayment, you absolutely don't have to. If you don't, your next year's assessment on your property tax bill will be no different than it was going to be anyways. So, but after June 15th, if you change your mind and you think you might want to prepay, you need to get a new quote in the city. We can help you with that. So I know there's a lot of information. It is very confusing. And, you know, there's some suggestion that, you know, if you've been living in Spring Lake since 2006 and making your annual payments, you know, you should be done paying by now, or you're not benefiting from the infrastructure that's being put in. And I just want to clarify that the way that the district was set up was everybody in Spring Lake contributes towards all of the infrastructure. And so whether you lived there in 2006 or now, you're still benefiting from the same infrastructure that's been put in and is continuing to be installed in Spring Lake. And so there is no differentiation between somebody who bought their house 10 years ago versus bought their house last year. So there is, I think, some confusion about that as well. So the city council did approve issuance of the bonds, which we are expecting to do that in August, so that we can allow for the installation of infrastructure to continue, and also to take advantage of very, very cheap interest rates right now for issuing bonds and borrowing money to complete some of the infrastructure out there. I do want to clarify that the bond money does not pay for park improvements. That's paid for through developer fees that are collected when houses are built in Spring Lake. So park construction is not impacted by bond sales, but certainly roads, water, sewer, storm drain solutions, those are all definitely included as part of the bond proceeds. So I know that's a lot of information, and can be confusing, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that might come up.
Thanks, Kim. So why don't we, I guess, hand it over and see if folks have questions that we can hopefully answer for you now based on what you've been reading, as well as what you've heard through the presentation. So if folks are interested, please raise your hand, and we'll call on you individually here to call in and ask a question. All right, Brian Coward, looks like he was anxious. Brian, do you have mic on?
Yeah, I do. Thank you guys for putting this on and you know, providing us a little more information. I just have a couple questions on kind of what you covered, Kim. Or sorry, Ms. McKinney. On the bond amounts that were needed, you mentioned that what was really needed to complete all the improvements was 200 million, and that what we're only allowed, the city is only allowed to go up to about 100 million. Can you explain a little bit why we aren't allowed to take out what we need to finish?
So we were limited in the amount of debt that we could issue, in part because of overburdening properties with taxes. There's a kind of acceptable statewide limit of assessments on properties in addition to property taxes. And also just the value at the time when Spring Lake was formed, it was just bare land out there. And so the value of the property for debt issuance purposes was limited. So the maximum that we could support at the time that it was developed was the $112 million. And the difference between what we can bond for and what is needed for the infrastructure, it doesn't mean that we don't build it. It just is paid for in a different way, which is through fees paid by the developers when they pull building permits and build the houses.
Okay, that's interesting. So so there's a way to fill in that gap between what's needed to build all the improvements necessary and then what we're allowed to take out through the Melrose.
Correct.
Okay. And then one other question. Well, you'd mentioned that payments. I think that part of the problem of why people are getting upset is because you could have moved here did you say 2004, 2006? You could have moved to Spring Lake, and you would have started making the payment that essentially stays static, increases by 2% every year. And you would have been here from that time. And the problem is that I think that, with the extension of the payments, right? So they should have been done initially. It would have been, I think, like 2030, right? And now it's getting pushed out. It can get pushed out to 2050, to where they could be making payments for nearly like 40 years, 45 years. And somebody could move in, let's say 2025, and they'll be done paying in 20 years, and someone else could have paid for 45 years. Is that right? Does that sound?
It's partially correct, yeah. So it's true that, you start paying when you pull a permit. So for somebody who didn't have a house prior to, let's say 2018, it doesn't mean that nobody paid on that property. Usually the property owners were paying Mello-Roos before they sold any of the houses. As they owned land, they were also subject to the special tax. There are different rates for developed property versus undeveloped property, but that piece of land has been paying for longer than you just owning it if you just bought a house. So maybe you personally, were paying longer, but that property was paying into the district for a longer period of time, potentially, than you just living there. And just to clarify also that it was always the intent that we would be issuing several series of bonds over time, which is why from day one, the annual assessment can go through 2050. It was never set up to stop in 2030. The first bonds were issued in 2004, and they were 30-year bonds. So that would have made them potentially, those would be paid off in 2034, and they still will be paid off in 2034, but we've issued additional series of bonds since then, which was, again, always the case, which is why through 2050, we have the setup to collect the special taxes.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. I think that's where people would get upset. They thought they were going to be done in 2034, and then all of a sudden there's a new bond issued, which is, necessary, but it's extending the amount of time they're going to have to pay, and they didn't, plan on that. So I completely could understand that. So I appreciate you guys kind of going over it. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Let's see, next we have Rosie.
Maybe Rosalie.
Shows up as Rosie on mine, but we're hearing you, so I think I picked the right one.
Okay, sorry guys, I got in a little bit late, but I'm a homeowner from 2009. And again, I'm one of those homeowners that was under the impression that somewhere around 2030, this was going to be a done deal. My bigger concern at the moment is how were we notified of this extension to 2050 or this new bond to 2050? And from what I understand, Monday is a deadline that this may extend my payoff upwards of $15,000. Is that correct?
So, yeah, I'm not sure where the belief that you would be done paying in 2034 came from, other than maybe it being tied to the very first bonds that were issued. All of the legal documents that were set up starting in 2004 referenced paying or potentially assessing the special tax all the way through 2050. So that didn't change between 2009 and now. It has always been part of the district. When we issue bonds, it goes through a normal city council meeting process. Issuing bonds doesn't change your annual maximum assessment, like I mentioned before. you know, it could be that if we had only issued the very first series of bonds in 2004 and never issued any more again, that we wouldn't need to collect the money all the way through 2050, but we also wouldn't have any money to complete the infrastructure out in Spring Lake. So,
Okay, so my next question is, because, you know, I think all of us homeowners that have been here for considerably more time probably would have paid this off or had this part of our initial mortgage or loan payment. Now, what's going to be happening on Monday? I mean, is there going to be something assessed where it's going to take the dollar amount of payoff substantially higher? Because if that's the case, I want an extension because I didn't know about any of this, and I certainly want to pay it off.
yeah, so we are, the 15th, the June 15th deadline that we've been talking about is the date that we need to receive. If you are going to prepay, that we need to receive the prepayment by that date, because we take the money that we get from any prepayments and we buy bonds back that are outstanding, and we have very specific times when we're allowed to do that, twice per year, and we don't have any flexibility in doing that. And so offering extensions, unfortunately, really is, we're not able to do because we can't request extensions to do that. We're locked in.
Because I
specific,
understand that we
can
just
do those.
can't go down to the city and say, what's my payoff, and pay it. I understand someone has to give us a payoff.
You could, yeah, you request a quote. I mean, because and issuing these bonds will change the quote, and it will go up if you choose to pay it off. If you don't want to pay it off, you don't have to, and your annual assessment isn't going to change. But yeah, I mean, it is a fairly quick turnaround to get a prepayment quote. And so if you have not received one yet and you would like to have one,
I want it before the 15th.
Yeah, we can get them for you. If you request, we will need your parcel number or your address, and we can have the quote done for you. If you request it before the end of before 5 o'clock on the 14th, we can have a prepayment back to you by the morning of the 15th. And I mean, you just have to know that it's a quick turnaround to actually make the payment then.
Okay, and I understand it's what, a cashier's check or?
Check, cashier's check, or cash. Yeah, we don't accept credit card for that is the only thing.
Are you with the city? Are you?
I am, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, it's all very frustrating. I think I'm done.
Right. Rosalie, thank you. If you have any other questions, feel free to stay on, and we'll have another opportunity if you'd like. All right, Megan Murray.
Hey there, can you hear
Megan?
me?
Yes.
Hi. Hey, I was just wondering how this is going to affect, if it does at all, residents who are unable to or are not prepaying. Are they going to increase, you know, will we see an increase based off the fact that the rest of our neighbors are paying this off?
No. So what happens if somebody chooses to prepay, we'll take the prepayment and buy back some of the bonds that are outstanding, and therefore we don't have to make the annual payment for that outstanding amount anymore. If you choose not to prepay, you absolutely don't have to, and it won't change your annual payments. And you know, even if 1,000 people chose to prepay and do that, it again would not affect anybody who chooses not to prepay.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks, Megan. All right, move on to Kim Mia.
Hi. So maybe I missed this part because I know that one of the previous owners asked this, but what kind of community outreach did you guys do? Because I'm looking at the board council meeting and it looks like this was passed on the 1st. And if I want to prepay this, but if I wanted to take equity out of my house, it would take a bare minimum of 30 days for me to get a HELOAN. So I literally don't have enough time to come up with $30,000. And now you're adding $15,000 to my debt. So how is that fair? It's literally not enough time. I don't know about you, but I don't have $30,000 just laying around.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do any specific outreach to the Spring Lake community, like you mentioned about issuing bonds, other than it did come up. And I'd seen some social media circling really started by the residents when somebody requested a prepayment. The prepayment calculations have been around since the beginning, since 2004. They're, it's legally required disclosures from when you buy your house, there are legally required disclosures that come from the title company and the sellers of the houses about the special assessments that your property has. So between the time when you found out about it and the due date, I understand it is a shorter in time frame. And if you can't come up with the money, you certainly don't have to. Nobody is required to prepay.
I know that we're not required to prepay, but my issue is from when this went to the board on the 1st to the 15th of your deadline of prepayment, you haven't given citizens the opportunity to make an informed decision. There was no outreach at all for the meeting on the 1st, and thank God that we have informed citizens that asked questions, because otherwise all of this wouldn't have happened. That's my concern. I understand we don't have to prepay, but the difference between not prepaying is about $50,000 when you compare what it would cost with the 2% increases and paying over time to what it is to pay it off. But at this point in time, you're not giving anyone the opportunity to come up with those funds unless we have $30,000 sitting in a bank account.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have flexibility over the date of the due date of the prepayment. So I recognize that. No, we don't.
You chose to issue those bonds within 15 days of your deadline. It's not like you put this on a resolution on April and then we'd have time to act. You literally put this as a fire sale. Like it feels like you snuck it in, so we had no choice.
Yeah, it was certainly not the intent to sneak anything in. And honestly, until this became it didn't occur. We had never had an issue about issuing additional bonds before. The prepayments people have prepaid every year since 2006, really. And so I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree that there could have been and maybe should have been different type of communication. But unfortunately, we can't change the due date of when prepayments are. We have no flexibility over when we have to turn that money in to buy back bonds. And that.
But you do have a flexibility of when you're going to issue them. You have that flexibility. You could delay those bonds. You could say you could
delay this 1 year, and do right by our community and delay them by a year for people to, or even 3 months.
So even delay, I would say even delaying the bonds, if we know that we need additional facility money, and by facility money, I mean to build infrastructure, the legally approved formula to do the prepayment calculation would still include anticipated additional debt. And so even if we delay the bonds and we know that we're going to issue them and we need them at some point, it's not going to leave the prepayment calculation at the lower number.
So you're basically saying that we're stuck. There's nothing we can do unless we come up with 30,000. Now you're going to tack on 15,000 to my payoff, which is going to significantly increase my payoff over the life of the loan.
Right.
Not by a small amount. I mean, we're talking about $50,000 with the increases. There's no recourse. It's coming with it, or we're stuck on a 2-week deadline.
Jim, recognizing that each of the properties has a different assessment amount based on the density. I mean, it's $15,000, the order of magnitude that homeowners are looking at, or that's a 50% increase over what they would prepay before these bonds were contemplated.
Yeah, I don't think it's $15,000. It does go up, and I know it goes up, and it's not an insignificant amount. But
Well, I was talking with Corey from the consulting group. He gave me the payoff. My personal property payoff is about 27,600. And he said that by the issuance of this bond, it's going to go up 40%. And that's how we came to the $15,000 difference of, so if I pay it by the 14th, it's going to be 27,000. And if I pay it by the 17th or 18th,
It's like $12,000.
it's yeah, it's like 13 to $15,000 more depending on.
yeah, I mean,
Significantly more. And I hope you understand, like over the life of a loan with the 2% increases, it's not a small amount of money. And I understand where this is coming from, but 2 weeks is not acceptable. Especially because we weren't even told. If we hadn't heard through social media, we wouldn't even know. There's got to be something you can do to give more time. That's all we're saying. We're not complaining about the issuance of the bonds or anything.
yeah.
It's just the lack of outreach and the short time frame.
Yeah, I hear you and I understand what you're saying. Unfortunately, we have no flexibility over the June 15th date to get the prepayment money. I hear what you're saying and what you're asking for. I literally I cannot do anything about the June 15th date.
Kim, if the consequence of, not issuing these bonds now or not going through with the bond issuance and deferring that for 6 months versus a year, right? Not only are we potentially exposed to much higher interest rates, which are on the horizon, we all know, which is going to translate to more costs for everybody. Would it, given the fact that additional bonds are known and needed, would that even result in a lower payoff amount at that point?
No, because part of the payoff, part of the math that's prescribed to come up with the payoff calculation includes future bond issuances. And honestly, the $27,000 number that you have now probably should have included more money than it did. And so because we still have additional facilities to pay for, even if we don't issue the debt and we say we're going to wait, 6 months or a year, but we know we're going to still need the money to build projects, it's not going to change. It's not going to decrease the payoff quote.
So, and I guess, back to the point that the knowledge that the bonds, were going to be issued over time to pay for the infrastructure, and that those bonds could extend to 2050. Right, we're part of the homeowners, purchase documents, and adding the additional bonds at this time, right? I guess it sounds like may affect the payoff amount, but homeowners had the opportunity to make those considerations at any point during their ownership of the property. And for a homeowner to decide whether their intention is to stay in the house long term, benefit of paying off if they were not to stay there long term would probably not be as beneficial as continuing to pay for the shorter duration versus somebody that intends to stay long term. It might make more sense to pay off, but yeah. So again, Kim and I guess your husband there, if you need a payoff quote and we need to clarify how much that amount is, please reach out to us before Monday.
We have a payoff quote.
Yeah, we already have.
We have it. The issue is that for me to mobilize that amount of money within 5 days, it's unrealistic. you tell me personally, do you have $30,000 in your back pocket? Because if you do, God bless you. I have to look for resources.
Sure.
And even if I were to tap into all of my equity, even if I were to get a HELOC, it takes 30 days to close.
Mhm.
Please understand that we are not the original purchasers of this. So we didn't go through the same house process, purchasing process that everyone else that bought brand new here. Sorry, I have 3 kids. Can you? So ultimately, we've lived here since November of 2020. I haven't been in my house a year. The bond issuance, all of this is totally new to me. None of it was disclosed at purchase. And when I asked both my realtor and my loan officer, they had no idea how long this was. They had no documentation of anything, or that it could be increased with further further bonds. So please understand that I have no information other than what I saw on a Facebook post from one of my wonderful neighbors, and there's no communication from the city. There was no communication when we purchased the house, not even a year ago. So this is making, I mean, this is a huge thing for us.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the disclosure stuff, I just, the city, we don't know when people buy houses, when new houses happen. It's not something we're typically aware of. And there are legal requirements for disclosures that your title company, there is a lien against the property related to the CFD. And so that should certainly be a part of any purchase of property out there when there's a title process.
Well, thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to it's like Brad Pesavano. Name's cut off there. Apologize if I got that wrong.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. Just a couple of questions. Some just to clarify, what is the amount in dollars, millions for this bond issuance?
So it's about $22 million that we're issuing.
And you said that would allow 9 million out of the 112 million for future issuance?
That would mean that, yeah, if we needed to issue any more debt in the future, if projects weren't completed and we needed that, there would be maximum of $9 million more available to be issued.
Okay, so we're almost at the 112
Pretty
million. Okay.
Mhm.
And those bonds need to be paid off by 2050. So the final date, if they're 30-year bonds, should have been 2020. Am I understanding that correctly?
If we were going to issue 30 years, yeah.
So
the term
we're
of
in
the bond is,
2021. So these will go to 2051. Is that correct?
no, they'll still be paid off by 2050.
So they're like 29-year bonds.
Mhm.
Okay. And so that 9 million, if we did it, say in 3 more years, by 2050, they would be, 26-year bonds or whatever. And the other person mentioned, and I know about the consulting company, are we paying them? Are they paid on like a commission structure, or do they have like an annual fee, or how are they compensated for managing the collection of the assessments and the controlling of the bonds?
The administrators of the bond, is that what you're asking?
The consulting firm in Sacramento, I know they do a
Yeah.
lot of mellow roofs for
Yeah.
the area. So
Yeah.
how are they being compensated for managing this for the city?
They are paid an annual, or have a contract for an annual amount that's included as part of the annual bond cost.
Okay, so they benefit when the bonds are issued, obviously, and they've been benefiting up till now. And they made the recommendation, I'm guessing, because of interest rate risk with, the Fed is about to explode. So,
Well, not the firm in Sacramento, Goodwin Consulting, who provides the calculation. They provide invoices for work that's actually done. They don't provide any suggestions on when we should issue debt or how much. They just administer what debt has already been issued.
Okay, so you hire like an outside firm then to do the evaluation for issuance?
There's underwriters that participate. Any bond that we issue includes underwriters. Yeah.
Okay, and what is their cut of the bond issuance? Like, what's their percentage for the 22 million?
It's actually not determined until closer to the sale price when we figure out what the interest rate is. But they do make some money. It's included in the overall bond size.
And this is public knowledge when it's completed?
Absolutely. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brad. Next will be Rosie.
Hi, I
Rosie
had spoken
again.
earlier, but I just, it seems like such a gross negligence to not have a period to inform residents. I mean, these decisions aren't made in a public forum, are they? With the issuance, when the bond date's going to go into effect? I mean, is this, I was unaware that this just happened on the 1st, that we were just notified on the 1st that we had till the 15th before the bond issuance was coming in. It just seems like a gross negligence to not inform the community with time to, to deal and make a decision, as I think Kevin and his wife were concerned about. I mean, where are these decisions made? Are they made behind closed doors? And then it's just, oh gosh, if someone finds out, thank God that maybe someone on social media comes out and the word gets out. I mean, otherwise, would it just be, okay, well, everyone's going along with their lives and we didn't know that, each year we're assessing, it's another 15 grand, it's another 10 grand. It just seems like a gross negligence not to inform a community of what's happening, because it's such a huge financial impact. I think there's a responsibility there that the city has in that. And I think Kevin and his wife have a valid point that 15 days to announce to us that it's happening with 15 days is just a gross negligence. And I'm going to look through my title paperwork. I mean, maybe we have recourse legally to go through the sellers or the builders or to combat this, because it seems as though if they had a responsibility to inform us and we were not, then it looks like a legal recourse might be something there. But I still feel as though the city has a responsibility to keep their residents informed of such a financial impact.
Yeah, I mean, Rosalie, appreciate that, and please know that the council's decision to issue the bonds was publicly agendized, and while I recognize, right, that doesn't necessarily mean that every resident out in Spring Lake was notified about that action, but again, these bonds could have been issued at any point, during the past year, and the fact that it's 14 days out from the pre-prescribed June 15th date absolutely is not ideal. But we do need to move forward with issuing these bonds, get the infrastructure in that is going to be built over the next year. So,
That doesn't help me.
I sympathize with it, and I wish it were different. Wish there was something we could.
It just seems as though it's shady, underhanded government entities taking advantage of people. And, unfortunately, we have a situation where our inflation and everything else is going to skyrocket because of this. I won't say it, but at any rate, I think it's gross negligence, and I'm not happy about it. I'm sure a lot of neighbors aren't either, but I think that an extension of some sort, I don't know how you could pull it off. I'm sure there's ways you can, but I think an opportunity to allow people to secure their finances should be looked at. That's just my viewpoint.
My concern is, even if an extension was approved, we don't end up benefiting the homeowners now at this point, and we ultimately, I think, will result in a higher interest rate and therefore less capacity to complete the infrastructure, because our bond, will not be then as large, and we'll pay a higher interest rate. So more likely that we'll have to then go out and issue the final $9 million worth of bonds later. So certainly
I
consult.
guess we have to stay informed and listen to every council meeting and get the communication out to the public and be aware of these things so we can hold people accountable. But it just does not seem equitable for residents, especially someone like me who's been here for 12 years. So at any rate, who do I contact immediately tomorrow to get my payoff?
We can call Goodwin Consulting Group. They prepare the calculations. I'll say out loud the 1-800 number right now, and then maybe we can circulate that number as well. Again, it's Goodwin Consulting Group, and their phone number is 877-561-8293.
Okay. And if any other neighbors out there, again, I'm going to be diligently reviewing my paperwork as far as what was stated as far as with the title company and my paperwork, because, maybe we have some type of class action suit if we all want to get together and compare notes on how we were informed of these things. But at any rate, I thank you for your time.
Right. Thanks, Rosalie. And I did, for everybody, I tried to, oh, there we go. Somebody typed it in properly there into the chat box for me. Okay. We have Jamie Burton.
Hi, sorry. I appreciate you taking my question. I noticed you mentioned from the date of issuance that you had 3 years to spend the money. So obviously this is a capital venture that would have been well planned. Where are those dollars going to be spent? And where have the dollars that have been collected previously been spent? Are those details reviewable publicly?
Yeah. So we have a list of projects that make up the $22 million that we're issuing bonds for. And so that's, it's part of the bond process. I'm happy to share that with anybody. We do have an accounting of where the other bond proceeds, what other projects have been built in Spring Lake with the bond proceeds. We have on our city's website a financial transparency portal where you can see any and all city transactions through there. Our finance staff or me, if you want to, be happy to help you look through there if you want to see it. And I think we have potentially an annual or a summarized report of projects in Spring Lake that have been built that we can also include on the financial transparency website. It's all public information.
Yeah, I feel like it would be in the city's best interest to be very forthcoming and transparent on the front end so that people understand here's where that bond money is going. I think there is a very strong perception that a significant amount of the bond money went towards the community center and the sports complex. Obviously, we know it goes towards roads and sewer, and that's been specifically delineated, but there have been other public use improvements that have been part of the master plan. Specifically, that I know the fire station is one that's a sore spot for a number of residents in Spring Lake, and that's still an open issue. There's been discussion. I know that there was land purchased within the last year or two, but there's been no motion in that regard. And I think that concerns residents they're being taxed on a bond issuance, but for the most part, in detail, they don't see where those dollars are going. And I think it would be, again, in the city and in the administration's best interest to be very forthcoming with, here's where your money's going. Yes, we're collecting another $20 million, another $9 million, but here's where that money's being spent. And these are the improvements that you can look to in the very short term, i.e. 3 years. And I don't see that coming from the city.
Yeah, it's a fair point and well taken. And we are talking internally about how to create better information and consolidate all the Spring Lake related information, whether it's a park question or your tax bill, or when is this road going to be completed and or open, or who do I call to complain to about the construction traffic going down my roadway. Right, there's no shortage of questions, largely because you're in a neighborhood that's building out. And the $22 million that we're issuing now is for that next and hopefully final phase of roadway, storm drain, street lighting infrastructure. The largest and probably most prominent piece of that infrastructure will be the final completion of Pioneer Roadway, south of Gibson Road and just north of Farmer Central. So a home builder has now purchased the adjacent property, and they're obligated to construct that roadway segment as part of their development. So that will actually commence later this summer and be a significant portion of that 22 million that ultimately will be issued. So mostly it's going to come in the form of roadway infrastructure, the storm drain, the primary sewer, water, storm infrastructure has been completed. So, and again, as Kim mentioned earlier, confusion around how the parks and the sports park are funded. Those are actually not paid out of the infrastructure CFD proceeds. Those are paid for by development impact fees by the developer upfront. So with all the development occurring out in Spring Lake over the last several years, hopefully folks have received the notice to provide input on how you want the final phases of those park improvements to look. We anticipate being able to design and construct those improvements over the course of next year. Again, those improvement projects will be funded not out of the CFD, but rather out of the impact fees paid by the home builders.
So when you say Pioneer being completed, are we looking at this $20 million also completing Heritage, completing 27A? Because those are projects that are having significant traffic impacts today. The fact that those roads are not completed, and the fact that Harry Lorenzo was closed, essentially funneling all traffic in the Davis direction, either to 102 or up or straight up Pioneer all the way to Cross.
Well, the traffic can now go down Parkland, which connects to 25A directly over to 113. And that was always part of the ultimate master plan, was to take that traffic off of Harry Lorenzo and shift it to the arterial street of Parkland Pioneer. But yes, the Farmer Central roadway is also going to be completed, as well as Pioneer.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, feel free if you have any questions about work that is going to be completed. Let me know. And Kim, maybe we can put out a specific list of the projects that are included in the bond, so that information is available. All right, Lawrence Rost, next.
Evening, thank you. So it sounds like your kind of keystone projects this money's being allocated for has to do with roadways. You'd spoke to the developer being responsible for a portion of that, but then I'm just kind of wondering which side of the equation that is.
Yeah, no, good question. Thanks for clarifying. So the developer is obligated to construct it The roadway segments that are part of the capital program for which the CFD was established to provide funding for. So they have to construct it, and once it's completed, they get reimbursed after it's completed. So there's an obligation that they construct it, but not necessarily pay for.
All right, so it wasn't really something that the constructor is contributing as part of the project. It's just something we're paying them to do.
Correct. Yeah, it's part of the CFD obligation. All the intract roadways, the neighborhood streets, those are all their obligation to construct and build. But the major backbone pieces of infrastructure in Spring Lake, the way that the master plan was set up, was to have all of those shared equally across the CFD and have those paid incrementally as builders built out segments.
Built out, yeah. So that to me seems to be, something that you guys have been planning out for a while, because we see the phases being phased out here on these disparate residential projects. So we see the expansion coming down. I'm kind of wondering, 15 days from the time you guys pass it to the time, we're on the hook. Did you guys just kind of wake up one night and decide, oh crap, we forgot to get $20 million and this has just been kind of rushed through? It doesn't leave a great taste, when somebody all of a sudden is just like pulling the parachute cord here. Like, are you guys planning this out right? Or is this, hey, we better get the loan for 20 million right now, otherwise we might have some interest to deal with and we'll figure out how to spend it later? Like, has this been planned out very well? And if it has, that's a thing that takes time. And why hasn't that been socialized better? On one hand, if you've been planning, why haven't you been sharing a little bit better, letting people know? You could put a slip in our property tax, which just came through, not very long ago. We just got that from the tax collector. So, that was an avenue available to you, which if you were planning this, kind of should have been part of the thought process at the time. Or on the other hand, was this just literally somebody sat up at 2 a.m. and said, we need this money, we better do this now, we'll figure it out later? How to use it?
Yeah, definitely not the latter and more the former. There's a lot of factors, and I'll have Kim sort of articulate some of them that go into when we ultimately decide to issue the bonds. And as Kim stated before, right, we don't want to issue bonds in advance of knowing when we're going to need to use the money. We don't want to sit on these bonds and pay an interest without the benefit of the improvements. And plus, there's typically a 3-year period to have to expend them. And so it's this dance with the development community, knowing when they're going to be in a position to actually complete the next phase of infrastructure and buy lots. And as you guys all know, the housing market took a significant upturn, ironically, during the last year. And a lot of builders decided to pick up some of these remaining lots, and then creating a situation where we needed to figure out how to pull together the bonds, which is a very complicated and long calculation process with a lot of information that we need to provide to the bond council. And so all of that sort of goes into this process, and then trying to time to some degree also, the interest market. So
I guess kind of from the perspective of, dropping kids off at school, how many times have you been by a school where they've got that thermometer board there? We're trying to get a new gym and the thermometer starts at 0 and then 0, 10, 20, and then up at the top, $150,000, we got a gym. And so every day you drop your kid off, you kind of see that thing ratchet up, ratchet up, ratchet up. Okay, look at that. We see, okay, cool. They got the parking lot for the gym in. Now the next phase. Okay, now they need the next 50 grand. And you can kind of see that progression in something that took, the PTA less than an hour to put together and a bunch of red Sharpies to color in the next block of $10,000. And so I think the perspective, it's like, man, if a little elementary school can piece that together for a gym, it's kind of interesting that the calculus is too unreal to kind of keep that more transparent to the homeowner here, who this is a bit of a surprise. Just all of a sudden, something like this that's baked into your city payment is not something that on its face is expected to be adjustable. This isn't a credit card right? Like we reserve the right to jack your rates when we so deem. So it's a bit surprising, and I understand there's disclosure documents there, and I bet we've all read those just as well as we've read the disclosure documents on our said credit cards, or every time you update your iPhone, I'm sure you read every page of that iOS update page. So yeah, I get it, sure, but that's a little, that's a little interesting. I think you can understand the perspective. There's also projects going along, a very large project here next to Sports Center. The new, they're finally developing that field there to the west of the Spring Lake. And then you also have a more dense project going on along Matmore. As these developments grow, how are you guys baking in a little bit of are you gleaning a little off of these new projects? Because it seems to me, as I seem to recall, this one to the west here, right off East Street, if we got my head on straight, East Street, and Sports Center. As I understand it, they're tying into our infrastructure without really contributing to said infrastructure, such as sewage, water, et cetera, essentially gleaning the benefit of our Melrose without actually contributing to it. Where's the city on ensuring that all of these projects, even like you say, it's like a gold rush. All these guys are coming in and building out of nowhere. COVID made everybody build houses. Cool. Are they paying their fair share?
Yeah, absolutely. The Prudler subdivision that you just referred to, which Lennar picked up and will start building homes there later this year. That project was actually entitled 5 or 6 years ago now. They are obligated to pay their fair share towards the infrastructure that they will be taking advantage of, that Spring Lake infrastructure plan put in place. So storm drain infrastructure that they will tie into, they have to pay back fair share towards that, as well as road improvements. There was a delta between what a typical Spring Lake house home builder had to pay versus what projects outside of Spring Lake pay. And so when we were negotiating the entitlement on that project, we calculated and brought their fees up to match through a form of a community benefit payments. Those funds are going to be set aside to help pay for the pedestrian bike overcrossing, for which Spring Lake infrastructure financing plan doesn't have any obligation towards. So we identified projects that weren't being funded by Spring Lake that do benefit Spring Lake, so the fire station, the pet overcrossing, things like that. They will pay an enhanced payment towards relative to what Spring Lake homes are paying. So it's not a direct apples to apples, but there's a parity in terms of how much those home builders are paying in terms
Is that
of
extending into this, I don't know, technology park, I guess, is that the correct nomenclature for that?
correct.
Project?
Yeah, so the research and technology part, right, same principle will apply, where they tie into roads and sewer and water storm infrastructure. The concept was that the next phase of build out of the southeast area would pay for the next increment of improvements, widening of the improvements to the 113-25 interchange, extension of the 25A roadway, the last piece of connection there to connect 102 to 113 will be their obligation, and for other improvements and balancing that out is part of their financing plan. So absolutely want to make sure that as new developments come in, they pay their fair share and then some.
And then, well, that's good to hear. Thank you. And then lastly, this is something you probably already covered. I missed at the beginning of this, having to do with the payoff. It's just, I'm not understanding this right. If I go off and I pay off my Melrose right now, what my outstanding balance, I would not be affected by this new issuance. Like I paid it off, it's done, and I don't pay this bill anymore. And after the 15th, you tack it on the credit card bill, and I'm stuck with it come hell or high water. That seemed a little confusing to me.
So You can prepay, if you want to prepay before the 15th based on a quote that you have now, you can do that, and you would be excluded from any future further
Oh, interesting.
Melrose assessments. If you wait until after the 15th, the amount that you would have to pay to prepay does go up. You can still prepay if you want and still be excluded from that point forward, or you could not prepay and your annual assessment remains the same as it would have been.
I see. Yeah. So yeah, you're just extending the length. You're tacking it onto the back end. What and the amount that is being assessed per property, that's a percentage based, or is it a mixed variable?
For a prepayment calculation, are you asking, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, how much you're going to assess X number of dollars to my property. X can be like, oh man, it's just 2% or whatever's on your property tax. Have a nice day. That's what you're going to be stuck with. Like, what's that formula look like? How are you guys deriving a 1,000 square foot house from a 2,500 square foot house? 1 acre versus 5 acre. I don't know.
Yeah, the formula looks at what your land use is. So if you're on R3, R4, R8, that's dependent on your lot size.
Okay.
What the zoning is of your property. That's how the prepayment calculations are determined. The same thing as your annual assessments are. All R8s have the same assessments. All R3s have the same assessments. Your annual assessment will go up 2% a year. The annual maximum assessment will go up 2% a year. If we get to a point where we don't need the maximum assessment in order to pay off any debts that's outstanding, we won't assess the maximum, but we have.
What do you mean? I don't know if I necessarily follow you. So you're saying that the amount that I owe you guys can grow. So you're tacking the percentage onto my account?
No. What I'm saying is your property is included in a CFD that has a special tax through 2050 and has had that since the beginning.
Sure.
And it doesn't change depending on when or how much we issue debt. That's what the maximum that you can be assessed is. What I'm saying is, and that, we can't change that. So if there's a period of time, and right now it looks like even with we issue this debt, the way that we structure the payments for it, there could be, the last 5 to 7 years from 2043 to 2050, we may not need to assess the maximum. And if we don't need to, we won't. But you have to, the legal disclosure requirements are what the maximum allowable is. So we're not adding anything to what was already included as the maximum. Your prepayment calculation will go up though, which you're not required to pay.
Oh yeah, we understand that we're not required to pay that.
I know there just has been a lot of comments and questions that we've been getting that folks seem confused that they are required to pay. So I'm sorry to keep saying it, but I just want to make it clear that nobody's required to do it. And
I think
it won't change anything.
The thought process there is pay what you have now. Otherwise, I mean, I'd imagine what you guys are talking about numbers wise, $10,000 to $20,000 per property is probably not unheard of, not exactly outlandish expectation for property. And hey, give us the money now, or we're gonna hit you for 10 grand tomorrow. I mean, that can feel forced, even though I understand you keep saying like, oh, people got it confused. They think they have to pay this, and it's like, well, they have to pay what they have to pay if they want to avoid. Who wouldn't want to avoid $10,000 to $20,000 of tax? Essentially. So that, I think, I can empathize with that thought process. So, all right, cool. Next player.
All right. Thank you, Lawrence. Moving on to Ron Ortel.
Hi, yes, this is Ron. Yeah, is this meeting, it looks like it's being recorded somewhere. I got here kind of late. Where can I access it afterward?
Yeah, so we'll post the recording this. I don't know, Kim, if it makes more sense under the Spring Lake FAQ section on our website.
Probably, yeah.
The what?
On the city's webpage, we have a a section that has an FAQ around the Spring Lake CFD. We post it there. We can also, work with some of the folks out there who are on Facebook, Spring Lake Facebook page, and share that as well.
How soon do you think you'll have that posted?
Well, I'll commit my my IT folks to have that done by tomorrow.
Oh, thank you. So, there's a couple things. I'm actually calculating this, and I don't know why there's any disagreement about this, but you guys are requiring, or the CFD requires basically 10% of the balance annually, the current balance, the current payoff balance, rising 2% a year. How is that not an effective interest rate of somewhere around 10.5% or in that range for the
Yeah.
next 29 years?
There isn't the same thing. You've sent your calculation to me, and I don't know really how to say it other than I feel like you're trying to make a connection as the payoff quote as a percent of your annual special tax payment. And I understand why that's confusing and why you might want to tie them together, but it isn't the same thing. So there is no interest rate associated or tied to your payoff quote. It's a point in time, what you would be paying. It isn't amortized over a period of time like your home mortgage might be. So I know you inferred some almost 11% interest rate that I can't see how you came up with it. And I think that it's not applicable.
It's pretty easy because, this is basically the same as borrowing your payoff amount. It's the same thing, borrowing your payoff amount and you're paying it off over 29 years. It is that simple. I don't know how else to put it. How else should someone look at it?
I mean, there's a lot of personal factors in deciding if you want to pay off. If you and I agree that if you were to pay off, you would essentially pay yourself back in about 9 to 10 years of what you'd be paying in your annual assessment. Maybe you aren't going to be in your house that long. Maybe there's something else that's important for you to do with available money that you might have that, maybe you invest it, then you would make more money than you would save. Everybody has different situations and different factors that that could be part of their decision. And so I don't want to tell you what that is there, but there isn't an interest rate on it.
The other thing I was wondering, thank you. The other thing I was wondering about is, a number of people, quite a few people are dropping out of the pool to be taxed further, to be subject to more bonds. Quite a few more than in a normal year, according to the clerk at City Hall, I assume because of all this discussion. So now you're going to have to assign those bonds to fewer properties. So where's that money coming from? Well, I saw like there's some reserve amount on the individual payoff statements, some reserve fund. Where's that money coming from? You already know what the bonds are right now, since they were passed a week ago. You have fewer properties to assign those to. Does that just mean it more likely that you're going to keep that 2% increase going right through 2050? Just more likely.
No, we've been tracking as additional prepayments come in and comparing what our annual debt service will be, and actually looking at conservatively what our debt service is with all outstanding bonds and what we're expecting to issue compared to what the amount we would collect each year is, excluding now anybody who has made a prepayment. And we're still able to cover the debt service that we need, even though once we buy back bonds, obviously the annual debt service that we need to pay will go down a little bit. So, there's also development that continues to happen, and those properties are also paying the special tax. So we've been tracking it. We've nobody, like I mentioned a while ago, that if your neighbor prepays, if a whole bunch of people in your neighborhood prepay, it does not mean that your property is going to have to pay any more than it would have.
No, that's not the question. The question is, and you say you're tracking it. I don't know what that means, but you have, as people drop out of they're no longer subject to the bond issuances. And there may be another one too, according to the meeting last week, on a smaller one. You have a fewer number of homeowners or property owners subject to those bonds. How is that accounted for? Where is that? You can't assign it to the old properties anymore that have dropped out. That has to be transferred somewhere.
No, because part of the process when you prepay is we take that money and buy back debt, so we don't have to pay as much each year to outstanding debt. We've been running a lot of calculations. When I say track it and account for it, Goodwin Consulting Group, who provides the prepayment calculations, also is keeping track of anybody who has actually prepaid so far. And we're also, they keep track of how many prepayment quotes they've done and that are outstanding and could be prepaid. And we have been factoring that into what our debt service looks like with all the bonds that are outstanding now and what we're anticipating to issue. And what I'm trying to say is that we still can meet the debt service requirements with the other properties still paying the annual assessment.
Yeah, so if 99.9% of the properties dropped out and you're saying you wouldn't have to issue your bond, well, you've already issued the bond. There's still something that doesn't make sense with this. You say you're buying back bonds, but if that would compare to, there's some difference between the amount you're taking in from each homeowner and the bond rate, but I don't know. I won't press that any further, but something doesn't make sense on this to me anyway, and to others. So. So I guess that's it. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Ron. Looks like Rosalie again.
Hi, guys. Okay, so I was able to pull out some of my paperwork and records from the purchase, and it does address the Melrose in here. Basically, it says the Melrose Community Facility District Act, enacted in 1982, allows local governments to create tax districts to finance public facilities, service improvements such as sewers, electrical, etc. The sentence that's I'm concerned about says Melrose taxes must be voted on and approved by a 2/3 majority vote of the property owners in the respective district. So is that speaking of our constituents that vote on that?
It's a vote that's done by whoever owns the property at the time the Melrose district is formed. So it was voted on by the property owners in 2004.
Okay, but it doesn't disclose about the continuation of bonds and extensions. Okay. All right. It's all very confusing. And again, I feel as though it's very, the non-disclosure, I think is rather deceptive. But I'll close with that. I think we're armed with a lot of information, and I think I'm going to hopefully get my payoff and get rid of this so I don't have to deal with this anymore. So thank you.
All right. Yeah, Rosalie, please, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate. All right, Lawrence Ross again. Welcome back.
I was just hoping I could get a little bit more clarity. The 2 callers ago, the gentleman was talking, and I was kind of talking about in my last turn, this 2% assessment growth. I'm just a little fuzzy. My understanding of this is you guys are going to issue X dollars of bonds. You are going to take that total number of bonds, that dollar total, and you're basically going to distribute it across the Spring Lake homeowners based on some formula. But essentially, you know, on Monday, you guys get the bonds. On Tuesday, you guys are saying this property tag, my house, for example, my property, its share is this dollar amount. Okay. I'm going to be then paying that off over 29 years, it sounds like. So I could take that number and divide it by 29, and that's my payoff schedule outside of any type of percentage like amortization, anything of that nature. Am I understanding that payoff schedule correctly? And if so, what's the whole 2% thing? I just don't understand. If you guys can increase my assessment, basically that base number that was originally assigned to my house, if you can increase that at 2% per year, how is that not basically very much like a compounded interest rate on a traditional loan?
So the 2% is added to the annual assessment each year, and you're right, it does compound over time.
And that is that original component that, you know, Monday you get the bonds, Tuesday is my assessment. You have placed on my property, that's my assessment. Is that correct?
No, so the amount per parcel, the annual assessment per parcel was determined in 2004. And since that time, increases by 2% a year what the maximum assessment is. And that depends on your particular zoning, like I mentioned before.
Right. So exactly.
So the issuance of bonds doesn't change that amount. That's based on a maximum amount of debt that we could issue, spread out over the units. And so if we issue bonds, you know, on Monday or Tuesday, that does not change the allocation to your property.
Of that I understand. I'm just, to me, it's like, again, you're the assessment. I'm trying to get the Rosetta Stone of words going on here. The assessment is my properties, my parcels portion of the original issuance, and then, you know, on the 16th, an additional issuance, and that is my base assessment. Is that a correct statement, or am I incorrect there?
For your annual assessment
My
or
annual
your payoff?
assessment.
It's based on your particular type of property's share of the overall anticipated maximum debt for the district.
So at one day, certain days of the year, my annual assessment number and my payoff number technically come together. Is that correct?
No, so the payoff calculation looks at what your parcel or your property's pro rata or respective share of outstanding debt is, or based on your annual payment, and assigns a percentage of that to you, and then also calculates in, and this is where the additional or the increased payment comes, any anticipated future debt to be
Yeah, so you're
issued.
basically like, we might be able to ding you later, so we'll just ding you now on your way out the door. It's kind of mentality. Like we're not going to be able to tax you later, so we're just taking a little bit extra right now, just in case we might have done that in the future.
I mean, it's just part of the calculation that was done in 2004 with the knowledge that your property will continue to benefit from the entire district, not just a portion.
And so, like, for example, the issuance that's coming up here on the 15th, on the 16th, essentially, maybe the 17th, I don't know, however long it takes, there will be a set amount of dollars. I could go down, like, you know, on one day I owed 10,000, and on the next day, or whenever it finally goes through, I would own, just for numbers, say 15,000. Like, okay, so it went up. I can measure that. I was at 10, now I'm at 15. That is a measurable amount. Now, that amount is my portion, right? Is that what you're calling the assessment, the annual assessment? This is the portion of remaining debt, you know, so you started off at, you know, we were at, on the 16th or whatever, well, you're at 15,000. And then every year I keep paying that down. And it sounds to me like you guys can kind of tack on an extra 2% onto the back end on years that is deemed necessary? Up to 2%, from 0 to 2%?
So what I call the annual, my terminology, the annual assessment is the amount that shows up on your property tax bill every year for the line item that says CFD 2004-1,
Mhm.
which is, you know, $2,200, $2,300, depending again on what your property is.
Sure.
When the district was formed in 2004, there's language that says that maximum assessment will go up by 2% a year. So every year that increases by 2%, the annual assessment.
Mhm.
And when and how much debt we issue doesn't change that.
Has nothing to do with
Unrelated
that.
to
That's
that.
just completely secondary, has nothing to do with anything then, with this anyways.
And it was anticipated from day one that that's how the calculation would go. So it isn't an attempt to tack anything additional on.
Is that for the lifetime of the property?
Through the lifetime of the collection of the annual assessment, which is through 2050.
Okay, all right. And okay, so
And
that's
that's
there
the
regardless, and that's not going to be adjusted, touched, or et cetera. Is that correct?
So that's the maximum, and what and that's what needs to be disclosed, is that that's what could happen to your property if we don't need the maximum amount every year. We won't assess it. So there's a potential that it wouldn't go up 2% every single year, what you actually have to pay, but we have to calculate a maximum that goes up 2%. I know it's a little bit
well, I guess it's a little confusing, because if it doesn't have anything to do with this, then why is it brought up?
well, there's a potential that, like I mentioned, based even on the additional bonds that we're issuing, that we won't need the maximum assessment all the way through 2050, but we still disclose that because we're required to, and also in the event that, you know, something happens and we end up needing it. But we're trying very hard to not need the entire maximum special tax all the way through 2050.
And if I pay off, do I still pay that assessment?
No, once you pay off, you're done. Your property's out of the special, of paying that amount, that line item will drop off of your property tax bill from that point forward, starting the next year.
And so the assessment is based on my presence of a debt, but it doesn't address that debt, and you can increase it at 2%, but somehow that extra 2% is not addressing the debt that it is addressing. That is very circular. I don't understand. You're saying that you can increase a bill that I'm paying to pay off a debt owed by up to 2% a year, which then holds year over year. And that is the payment, which is resultant of this debt borne. That seems incredibly circular, that's not just an interest rate applied to the debt. And so I'm trying to figure out, if you guys are tacking me on for 5-10 grand, whatever it is, okay, 5-10 grand at potentially 2% a year, compounding over 29 years, trying to get that math straight in my head. And then you say it's not that way, but then when you describe it, it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck. So I'm not sure where I'm getting off the rails there. The assessment is born of my debt, yes?
The assessment, it comes from overall debt in the district, which is
of
not
which I am a
specific,
portion.
of which you are a share. It's not specific to there isn't a amortization schedule that's specific to your parcel that pays off your share of debt over a specific period of time, which I think has been a challenge.
And you can increase my share of that debt by up to 2% per year. Or where's the 2% addition on? I mean, that's what
the
2% on what?
On your annual contribution towards debt service, which our debt service has been structured and set up over time that it goes up a little bit every year too, because the annual assessment goes up. So they kind of match each other, that we need.
So it's not on the outstanding debt itself, but just on the cost of servicing said debt.
The annual debt payments, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Looks like two more here. Forzan Vaziri. Mr. or Mrs. Vaziri, I think I've unmuted you. Are you able to speak? There we go. Is that better? All right, maybe not. We'll come back. Keep your hand raised if you're still interested, and we'll try again here in a minute. Steve Briscoe is next.
Hi.
Steve.
Hi. First time caller, long time listener. You guys are holding up really well. My question was, well, not a question, but my comment was that it seemed like the kind of thing that would have been nice to know when we first bought the house, first of all, that was a possibility to pay this off. It might have been something you could roll into your loan. And the other thing is that it seems like the payoff thing sort of plays into, well, it's people who can afford it, right? Who have money sitting around in some ways who can do this. And it doesn't seem fair, I guess, in some ways that those who are left with that debt, I mean, either they've chosen to put their money elsewhere, or they can't afford to do this, which seems like a good way of getting, especially if you're going to be here 10 years or more, seems like a good idea to kind of get that out from under you or over you. So that's my 2 cents at any rate.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is well taken, right? Those that are in a position to be able to pay it off, maybe they benefit more. But you know, all of these financial decisions we make personally, right? We all have choices, I guess. And yeah, so unless you have another comment, I'll try again with Mr. Vaziri. Ms. Vaziri.
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Oh, hi there. Yep, now we can hear you.
Okay, good. I'm new to Melrose and I'm not very versed on this. And I moved here a couple of years ago and we didn't have Melrose on the other houses, but I am questioning, are you able to tell us what percentage of homeowners are dropping out of this Melrose, what percentage are paying it off, so that I know what the resale value, how it's going to impact my resale value, because I'm sure it's going to, other people that have paid it off can advertise for that they have already paid off their Melrose. Is that some information that can be easily ascertained so that I could possibly say 98% of the people have not paid off their Melrose? Or
Yeah, most people have not paid off their Melrose. In fact, I mean, I would say we average probably maybe 10 to 15 a year paying off their 10 to 15 parcels in total per year paying off their Melrose. It's a lot higher right now, but still not anywhere near the majority of the property owners in the district.
okay, and this assessment that's going in, that was that's initial Melrose that started in 2006 and this was supposed to end in 2025, that's being extended to 2050. The increase is going to go into effect on the 15th this year. And every year, let's say it's 10,000. I was listening to Mr. Ross as he was speaking. There's an assessment of 10,000 initially because it's going up to the payment will be extended to 2050. So every year there could be a 2% increase on that amount. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to follow it. So please explain it to me.
Yeah, so the district since 2004 is when it started. And it was always set up from that time that the the annual, so the Melrose payment that you make each year on your property tax, that was expected to go through 2050. From 2004, that's always been the case. So the 2025, 2034 years that are going around, those somehow became included in a conversation that they're never accurate as far as stopping the Melrose. So we never extended it. It was never supposed to stop at any other time prior to the 2050. And then also since 2004, the annual amount that goes on the property tax, again, because of the way that the district was set up then, goes up by 2% a year. And that happens regardless of when or how much of the debt that we issue.
Okay, I think, well, you answered the extent, the length of the Melrose. Thank you for that. And okay, so majority of the population, homeowners, are still going to be paying the Melrose because we're not dropping off that many homeowners. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess, I'm sorry, I just got some information that since we've been tracking it, there's just about 200 properties in total in all of Spring Lake that have ever paid off of the Melrose.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Looks like Brian Coward might be.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'll try to make this quick. I know we're getting going on an hour and a half here. I just listening to the conversation. I have a couple questions about the Melrose and when it was originally voted on to approve it, and the owners then, and on the 2%, and one other question on the prepayment. With the original landowners approving it, you know, there were probably a handful, right? Maybe half a dozen landowners that approved it. And that approval from those 6 people affect every other property owner within this area for the next 50 years, and they don't get any say in the approval of bonds that are issued after the fact. That's the case.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is no revote after the formation. Yeah, so whoever was the property owners at that point in time, which in 2004 was a fairly small number of property owners that voted for the district that was set up.
And that's
which is very
like,
common.
that's legally, you know, right? Like every other Melrose that's issued, the property owners that are actually affected by the increases don't have a vote in those increases. It's just happening no matter what. It was already voted
Yeah, I mean,
on.
they're the property owners at the point in time, and that's the legal process, and that's very common in how Melrose districts are set up
Okay.
all over the state.
But Kim, that's also why when you form the district, you prescribe the maximum number of years, the maximum amount of debt that can be issued, that then translates to the maximum amount that future homeowners would be subject to.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, that's all
okay.
part of the.
Okay, and then a question on the 2% max. You know, it's determined that it's going to be 2% annually, right? Every year there's is there an assessment that's done of the debt, of the administrative costs that justify that 2%?
So the 2% is automatic, that it goes into the calculation of the maximum allowable. What we look at every year is how much debt service do we have to pay, how many properties are paying the assessment in for how much, and then we determine, do we need to assess the maximum or can we assess something less than that? So like I said, the 2% is automatic on the maximum. It's not automatic that we have to assess the maximum. And
I think that, okay, so I'm getting a little confused when you say that it's automatic. Well, you say it's automatic, and then you say that maybe in the future we won't have to raise it that 2%. To me, says that it's not automatic, that every year you're making some assessment that determines that 2%.
The maximum amount automatically increases that could be assessed, but then it's adjusted based on whether it's determined that maximum amount is needed.
Okay, so you can decrease the amount.
Correct.
We can put something less than the maximum.
Right.
And so is there every year, do you guys generate any reports that justify that 2% increase? And also, since we're getting the bond at a low interest rate, shouldn't we expect that low interest rate to, alleviate some of that pressure on that 2% increase every year? I mean, shouldn't we appreciate those gains of the bond being at a lower rate?
Yeah, I mean, the lower interest rates do help. And while it might not take pressure off of needing the 2% right now, because there's already debt that's been issued over time that's relying on that 2% right now. But we're trying to take advantage of good interest rates so that hopefully we can assess less than the maximum prior to 2050. So we're trying to, it does help that way so that we don't have to maybe automatically apply the 2% and assess it every year all the way through 2050. So the interest rates are helping with that right now.
And I guess, it'd be nice information to have annually where you're justifying why it's 2% to the people who are still having to pay it. That seems like that would help people understand, why they're having to constantly. And it does sound like it's compounding to me because it does add on every year. So the amount that everybody owes goes up and up and up and up by 2%. So my next question, last one, on the prepayment. Hold on one sec. Going up regardlessly. Okay, so in a week, the prepayment amount is going to go up by, it depends on different properties, but it's going to go up by a certain percentage, no matter what, regardless as to whether we issue the bond. I think you'd made the statement prior, now or in a year. How is that possible? If the bond isn't issued, like if we were to postpone the issuance of this bond until next year, wouldn't that delay this increase to the prepayment?
No, it doesn't. And that's because part of the prescribed calculation says that we have to look at what the parcel's pro rata share of future facilities, which boiled down to language means your share that your property will benefit from additional debt that will be issued to build infrastructure for the district.
So it was only coincidental that you're issuing the bond at the same time that this rate was going up.
It is, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the timing,
Wow.
yeah, it is coincidental and it does look bad, but it would go up anyways.
Wow. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
Brian. All right. Mr. Ortel, any question?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the ability to ask more than one here. Just two things, a couple of things. I already know this, but I guess you guys have already confirmed that, if the property's sold, the new owner won't be subject to this, right?
Right.
Okay. But, following up on what Brian just said, that's odd. Because I thought this was due to the issuance of new bonds, but you're saying there's some separate decision about what a property is subject to in terms of improvements. I'd like to see a list of the whole improvements. Maybe you guys went over this earlier and I'll look at the meeting, but like some separate decision we're only talking about the payoff. I think everybody understands the payment now, or, we don't understand the relationship between the two, but there's some separate decision. You said you could delay the bonds for a year. I'm just curious, like you could delay the bonds for a year and yet the payoff goes up Monday or Tuesday, whatever it is. That's right? This,
Yeah, so because we know that additional facilities still need to be built and there's still, it's likely that additional bonds will be issued. Part of the calculation that was prescribed in 2004 is calculating what each parcel's fair share of additional future debt would be. So, and you may not have been here when I said earlier that the quotes that have been given out now probably should have been higher than they are. But yeah, so even if we're delaying it, we know that we need to do it and that, you know, in all likelihood at some point it's going to happen. And so that would be part of a prepayment calculation moving forward.
you know what? That's odd. Yeah, I would think all you would know right from when the development's built. I guess you don't know with inflation, but what is going to all be required. Oh, well, yeah, it's a sad situation for those of us who've already kind of missed out quite a bit. And I think sounds like a sadder situation for those who can't pay it off now, but oh well. But thank you.
Good, thanks, Ron. Nobody else currently has their hand raised. So as I do a quick wrap up, anybody has last questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, appreciate the time and the interest. Apologize for any confusion or frustration that you might be experiencing around this, but please know that there is no government deceit underlying all of this. We're doing our best to try to get the Spring Lake neighborhood built out with the parameters that were established in 2004 when the project was originally approved and the CFD set up. We're doing our best to serve you and make sure that when this project's ultimately built out and complete, your neighborhood is one that is even better than it is today. So thank you for your time and interest. Please do not hesitate to follow up. Anybody, of course, that might be interested in finding out what that prepayment calculation would be prior to June 15, in the chat box, there is a contact information for the consultant that can calculate that for you. So please reach out to them prior to Monday morning if you're interested potentially in paying that off. So. All right, Kim, thank you for fielding all the questions, presentation, and folks have questions offline, feel free to reach out to us on email or phone as well. So thank you again, and everybody have a good night.